happy to share with you just a little bit of what I'm reading or what I've been reading in the past few months. Is really um, so you guys know. I mean, if you watch any of um, my videos, right? That oh, by the way, let me know where you're coming from. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me know, how your day's going. All of that. I want to hear from you, right? I love building a community here and having people interact and us share ideas. That's what it's about, really. But you guys know I do my best to take like a scientific approach, an evidence-based approach, really an evidence-based approach to personal development, these topics of personal development or leadership. And there's a lot of there are a lot of books out there that talk about these topics, but they're going from and they're great. John Maxwell and actually I really revere these people. That really great writers. But what I have always really wanted, right? I've always seen that's missing from a lot of personal development content and books is citations. I mean, just simply citations. I mean, I had a video on this when I talked about Robert Greene's books. Well, one of Robert Greene's books, The 48 Laws of Power. Right, I have a whole video about this. Where are the citations? You're making a lot of behavioral claims, right? You're making a lot of claims about human behavior, right? And very bold claims about human behavior. We better have some studies to back it up. We better have some evidence to back it up. We better have some theory to back it up. And so that's what I appreciate. So I'm going to give you guys a few books that I've been reading recently that I think really hit the mark in terms of evidence-based topics. So in terms of leadership, so there's one book that I've been reading recently. Actually, I have to get the author again. So hold on. Yeah, her name is on the tip of my mind, but Mary Murphy. Okay, so Cultures of Growth. There's a book called Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy, and you guys may have heard of these concepts of fixed mindset, growth mindset, right? What is fixed mindset versus growth mindset? For those you don't who are not maybe haven't heard of it. Well, of course, people like Carol Dweck. She is a researcher who's talked about fixed mindset, growth mindset, but fixed mindset is essentially the idea that or the mindset that you have, and mindset does have a specific definition in psychology, but the mindset that you have, it's a mindset that you have that essentially you're not changeable. Your growth, basically your abilities, your talents, it's not changeable. It's not changeable. It's fixed, right? It is what it is, and if it, and what does that do? That actually holds us back from a lot of potential experiences. So people who maybe are not so confident in themselves or not traditionally intelligent, and then others who are very highly intelligent, maybe high IQ score and everything like that. These people, both groups, they tend to have or they can have a fixed mindset, especially if you're very smart in a way, in the traditional book smarts where you've gotten to Ivy League schools or right, and I've experienced it. I've gone to Ivy League schools. A lot of the people around me, I observed kind of had this fixed mindset, right? In the sense that, yeah, I'm just smart. That's why I can get a good grade in physics. I'm really, I'm really smart. That's why I can do this, this course or perform well or do this degree, right? So that idea, I'm just smart, is actually not a science-based or evidence-based viewpoint, but we carry that around a lot. Or I'm just stupid. It's the flip side of that. I'm just stupid. I don't have the ability. I can't do it, right? Now, Mary Murphy was one of the first, actually, I think the first researcher to look into the question of, well, individuals have growth mindsets or fixed mindsets. Are there, do organizations themselves have fixed mindsets or fixed cultures? And this book by Mary Murphy, Cultures of Genius, is a really, or no, sorry, Cultures of Growth. It's called Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy, PhD. She's a social scientist, a behavioral scientist, and she's done research in this book that she explores fixed mindset cultures versus growth mindset cultures. And how many books out there have we heard about organizational culture? But again, they don't have any citations, they don't have any research. It's just, here's my personal experience as a leader, or here's my personal experience building teams, or, here's an anecdote. This is what this company did, and this is what led to its success. Yeah, how do you know? Right? We need an actual structure. So she does provide that structure. That's why I appreciate the book. So she argues that mindset isn't really an individual thing. When we have a certain mindset, fixed mindset or growth mindset, it's not really an individual thing. She says it's entirely up to the individual what kind of mindset they have, or it isn't entirely up to the individual what kind of mindset they have. She says it's largely a product of the environment. And we know from the research of people like Albert Bandura, who actually invented the entire field of social cognitive theory, that environment has a very strong impact on us. It is possible to go too far with this, though, right? To conclude that, okay, environment is the only thing that, that matters, and all of that. That's actually, it's important to note that that's not the conclusion here that she's making. She's making a more subtle conclusion. Is that our mindset, what mindset we develop, is largely affected by, right? We can fight against it, we can swim upstream against it, but it's largely affected by and often determined by the environment that we're in. Imagine it. Let's say, just as an example, if you're a student in a classroom and you have a teacher who always says things like, if you work harder, you'll do better, right? The reason you didn't do well was because you didn't practice enough, or all of those things, right? Those ideas, those little things that are said repeatedly, again and again and again in the classroom. The fact that it's said repeatedly, it's instilled repeatedly, that starts to create a culture, and that's a culture of growth. That's an example of a culture of growth. The idea being, well, if you didn't do well, it's not because, a fixed mindset culture would be that everybody in the organization believes that, has this belief underlying, and uses language that reflects it, underlying it, that, if something goes wrong, or I didn't do well on, let's say, a test, or I didn't do well on some project, right? It's because I'm not talented enough, or because I am not good enough in some way. It has nothing to do with, or has very little to do with how hard I work. It doesn't matter how hard I work. I'm still just, because I'm, stupid, fill in the blank, stupid, not good enough, not talented enough, whatever, then that's, it doesn't matter. Even if I work really hard, it doesn't matter. Just because of those things, I'm not going to succeed. And there are organizations, in every organization has a degree of a fixed mindset culture or a growth mindset culture. So, and she investigates, she talks about several case studies, but of different organizations, companies, and so forth. But it's a good question to ask yourself in the meantime. What organizations are you currently part of? Even organizations can be, let's say, your family, right? Your family environment, your home environment could be kind of an organization, right? What kind of organizations, whether it's work, family, social group, are you a part of? And what are the words that they constantly use? What is the language that they constantly use surrounding ability? That will give you a tip as to what the culture is, what the growth culture or culture of growth or culture of genius is. And she says culture of genius is the fixed mindset culture. Culture of genius means, you're either a genius or you're not. You either have it or you're not, or you don't. You either have talent or you don't. And what we know from a lot of great work in neuroscience that's been done, in cognitive science that's been done, is that more and more, like every week, and every month, we're seeing actually just amazing research that comes out showing the power of what's called neuroplasticity in the brain, where that suggests more and more and more that talent isn't something innate, right? Talent isn't something fixed. Talent is something that can be shifted, changed, grown, retracted, right? It really will, your brain is a lot like a muscle. The more you train it in certain ways, the more it will actually grow in terms of actual brain matter and brain density. Your brain density will actually grow and increase in certain regions of your brain because of your practices. And so, what's talent then? What's talent? Talent is not necessarily innate. Yes. Could there be, and this is a strong point, right? Could there be some upper limit on our abilities? Some upper limit? Yes. But it stands to reason that most of us have not really achieved that upper limit. That upper limit is probably quite high, and most of us haven't even explored the upper regions of that upper limit. And so, yeah, could there be an upper limit? But it's almost beside the point that there's a genetic upper limit to our abilities and our talents, because there is so much room for growth. So, why is this all important? She says organizational mindset is a predictor, and then we'll move on to the other books that I'm reading. But organizational mindset is a predictor of both individual and organizational success, right? So whichever mindset you have, and why? Why is it a predictor? It's actually a predictor, and predictor means there's research showing that it's a predictive factor. Why is organizational mindset a predictor of both individual and organizational success? Well, take a look at this claim that she makes and this observation. So because organizational mindset is a predictor of whether individuals will engage in certain ethically problematic behavior. For instance, hoarding information, hiding mistakes, stealing ideas. So if your organization, if the culture in let's say your workplace is that of a fixed mindset culture, what she calls a culture of genius, that means, Malefi, welcome, and great to have you here. If the culture that you find yourself in is a team culture or an organizational culture that is a fixed mindset culture, you're more likely, think about it, you're more likely to hoard information instead of share it, right? Hide information. Why? Because the more information that you have, the more you have an advantage over other people, because that's what makes it, right? It's all external factors that are important, right? Let me keep all the information. Let me have the advantage over my coworkers because, we need to compete, right? We need to compete because, the more, it's not based on my personal ability. It's based on maybe, the information that I have and they don't have. And hiding mistakes is another one. Hiding mistakes is one sign that you're in a culture that is a fixed mindset culture, right? People hide mistakes that they make. Why? Because again, the belief throughout the organization is that you're either smart and you don't make mistakes, or you're not smart. You're either talented and talented people don't make mistakes, or you're not talented. But the reality is that human beings make mistakes. I mean, if you're a human being, you make mistakes. I don't know how many mistakes I've probably made in the past week, right? So we make mistakes. And the problem is when you seek not to make mistakes, you actually are hindering your learning process, and it's actually a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle, what's called a feedback loop, of stifling a growth mindset even further. And stealing ideas, right? Well, if and you get the idea. So it actually leads to unethical behavior in an organization. And so think about it. A lot of the corporations that you see, Malefi, is it bad having this kind of mindset though? It depends on the results you're looking for. If you're looking for, let's say if you're looking for more cooperation, between people, and more teamwork, and more results from more people, right? Basically more efficiency, then yeah, it would be a bad thing, because what Mary Murphy is pointing out in this book, again, it's called Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy. What she's pointing out is research that shows that companies, organizations, and it's just organizations across the board. She's looking at companies specifically as an example, but really organizations across the board that have a culture of growth, a growth mindset culture throughout the organization, where people are open to making mistakes, right? They admit their mistakes, and they try to they don't abandon responsibility. They accept responsibility, but they learn to get better, right, from it, and all of that stuff. And they share information. They share ideas. That kind of culture, if you even stop to reflect, sharing ideas among the group, sharing information, right? Admitting mistakes so we can learn better from them and do better next time. Doesn't that even just make sense that would be more efficient, right? It would. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, above and beyond the fact that there's research on it, it makes sense that those kinds of behaviors within an organization would make the organization more efficient. And I've seen it. I've worked with teams. I used to build sales teams. I don't build sales teams anymore, but I used to build sales teams, and I've seen this. The more open people are with each other, the more they trust each other, and the more they communicate openly about mistakes or setbacks and these kinds of things, and negative things that they want to make better. Well, the more able we are to be able to see reality as it is, instead of just wishing, seeing it as we want it to be, seeing it as this ideal. And if you look around the world, the best leaders, well, let's talk about the worst leaders. The worst leaders create their own reality. Everything is the way I say it is, right? Everything is, I don't want to hear from other people who tell me no, right? Those people end up, in the long run, failing. Why? Because they don't have realistic, accurate information. And you can only make good decisions if you have realistic, accurate information. I mean, this happened to King Philip II of Spain, when he wanted to believe the Spanish Armada against England was the most powerful, when it really wasn't. If they had accepted that and made improvements to the strategy, they would have won. As an example, I mean, we could go on and on about examples of this, but there's another book that I have really enjoyed. It's called Fluke. Hold on, let me find the author again. Fluke. It's called Fluke. Chance, Chaos. Great, Malefi, and welcome. So Fluke, Chance, Chaos, and Why Everything We Do Matters, right? So this is a great book by Brian Klaas. Brian, B-R-I-A-N, and last name Klaas, K-L-A-A-S. So Fluke, it's a great book. I'm actually going to talk about this book, and I'm going to talk about the points that this author makes, and then I'm going to talk about another book that I read recently that kind of contradicts this book in a sense, all right? And then where do we come to a middle ground with understanding the small details, the nuances of the points of each book. So we'll discuss that. So Fluke, and share in the chat, guys, if you're reading any good books right now, you have good recommendations. I always love to hear book recommendations, so let me know. So in this book, Klaas argues that in order to build more robust systems that take into account the inherent, so basically he says that it's almost impossible to build a system, a complex system, that is predictable, right? And by complex system, what does he mean? What does he mean by a complex system? So like a society is a complex system, right? Like a government is a complex system. A company is a complex system. There are a lot of moving parts, right? A lot of things happening all at once. A lot of different, factors. A lot of factors we cannot account for. One very, very good example of why we can't, predict the outcomes within these complex systems is, and he gives a good example, is weather patterns, right? why can't we predict the weather with high degree of accuracy, like what, a month out? We can predict it with some degree of accuracy, maybe a week out. We can predict it with some degree of accuracy 2 to 3 days out, right, or the next day. But why not a month out? Why can't we predict weather a month out? Why can't we predict weather 5 years from now? On this day, what is it going to be, 5 years from now? So one of the points he makes is that, and this is actually a statistical phenomenon too. This is true from the standpoint of statistics. If you have a lot of variables all at once, so what's weather? It's a bunch of variables: wind, pressure, geography. You've got your wind currents. You've got all different factors operating all at once, right? Even like the Coriolis effect and all this stuff that you've got happening all at once. Okay, so you've got all these factors operating all at once. The reason it's very difficult to predict is because the more time passes and the more variables that are in that system, the harder that it is to predict. So because you're dealing with time as an additional variable. All right, so stay with me here. So he says that in order to build more robust systems, right, we have a problem. We have a problem with our society, is that we have these big systems, all right, and if they fail, they have horrible results. Right? Look at the 2008 financial crisis. Right? In the 90s, look at what was called the Asian contagion, right? The Thailand, these are just financial crisis examples, but Thailand, unpegged its currency from the dollar. It caused a whole, financial catastrophe in Asia and beyond as well. We can look back at a lot of different crises, the Great Depression. So these are examples of big systems, and if something goes wrong, because it's so complex, the system can't handle it. It falls apart, right? We've seen this time and time again, right? Revolutions, right? Throughout history, wars. So he says, well, how can we build more stable systems? Even though these are not predictable, right? These complex systems, how can we build better systems? Well, he says in order to build more robust systems that take into account the inherent unpredictability of complex systems and preventing what he calls cascading failures, he emphasizes building systems that emphasize three things. Instead of emphasizing efficiency, right? Because now, what is our problem? He says our problem is we optimize for efficiency in a system, but we shouldn't optimize for efficiency. We think that that's logical, right? It's not necessarily logical to optimize for efficiency in a system. So instead, we should optimize for three things. And he has a really great, so this book, again, is based on some really great statistical concepts and statistical analysis. So it really makes a lot of sense. One, incorporate elements of randomness into the system. I won't elaborate on all this because I want to get to the other book and compare and contrast the other book to these points. Incorporate elements of randomness into the system. Two, create overlapping systems. So create overlapping systems and some redundancy, meaning actually create some inefficiency in a way. And then three, create an environment that supports learning from mistakes. So, great book. Read it to get the full context of it, but it really speaks to, okay, how do you design a better systems that are not prone to failure, right? Constant wars. What is the history of most of the history of humans? War, right? For most of human history, the history of humanity is, if you look at it, mostly war. Things falling apart. Things constantly falling apart. Systems being built up, empires being built up, and then collapsing, right? And then other empires being built up and then collapsing, right? Malefi, the name of the book here is Fluke, F-L-U-K-E. It's by, again, Brian Klaas, B-R-I-A-N. Klaas. So really great book. I want to go over to the book. So why it's called "Why People Do What They Do." I have to just. Oh, here we go. "Why People Do What They Do, and How to Get Them to Change" by Sadi Lalo. So we made the point with Fluke, with this book Fluke, which is again a fantastic book. He makes this point that everything is unpredictable in big systems. Everything is unpredictable. So very hard to predict the outcomes in the future, right? What's the U.S. going to look like in the future? Who knows? What's Europe and Russia and China and what are all these places going to look like? What are our societies going to look like in the future? He says impossible to predict, almost impossible to predict. But he gives us 3 ways to improve, right? Improve and try to not make things more predictable, but make things less prone to catastrophic events. I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing. This book by Sadi Lalo takes not necessarily a contradictory approach. It takes a little bit of just a contrasting approach. So Why People Do What They Do and How to Get Them to Change by Sadi Lalo. So Sadi Lalo proposes through, again, a lot of data that he provides, a lot of actual research that he provides and cites in this book. And I love that because you can go, you don't have to accept what the author says. I hate just accepting what an author says. I'd rather hear what an author has to say, not accept it right away, be a little skeptical, go look at their sources, read them for myself and say, does this person have a point or not? This person does have a point, I will say, because I've looked into a lot of the studies and the evidence that he provides. So Lalo makes this point about what's called installation theory. He says installation theory is a great way to predict human behavior. Unlike Brian Klaas says everything's unpredictable, but Lalo says human behavior is surprisingly predictable. We are surprisingly predictable. He gives the example. Think about what you do every day. Do you do things drastically different every single day, or do you wake up, do a certain routine, go to a certain place to work, come back, do a certain thing, and repeat the process, right? We're remarkably predictable, he says. And installation theory, he says, is one way that we can actually make predictions about human behavior. Note what his claim is here. His claim is not that we can make predictions about groups of people. That's the point that Klaas is making. When you put people in systems together, it is hard to predict. But when we go to the individual level, Lalo says, this is where we should start, the individual level, and try to figure out, okay, why do people do what they do? And installation theory that he gives 3 reasons for people's behavior. 3 basically motivators of human behavior. One is what's called affordances. Affordances is just literally physically what you can do. So for instance, it's like a physical impossibility. Let's say if I tell you, right, I'm going to ask you to predict something here. I'm going to ask you to predict somebody's behavior here, right? Just give you the scenario. We have 2 doors to get out of a building. And let's say this person wants to get out of a building. There are 2 doors. Door A is open and unlocked. This person can go out freely if they want. The other door, door B, is locked and actually sealed shut somehow with no key. Which door is the person going to take? Well, in this case, see, it's obvious, right? It's obvious to predict that the person's going to go through the unlocked and open door, right? It just makes sense. That's what's called an affordance, meaning what is actually physically possible. He says this is something that we don't often think about, but what is physically possible versus what's physically not possible does determine a lot of our behavior, right? So that's one. And I actually forget, off the top of my head, I can't remember all the terms. But there's another one, social pressure. So social pressure is, social pressure has to do with let's say, okay, let's say you want to go, you get off at the airport, right? You get off at the airport, and you want to go home, right? So the cheapest option might be to take the subway, right? You might take the subway home because that's let's say the cheapest option, taxi, or whatever. So let's say, even if it costs more, let's say it's cheaper, there might be some social convention, right, in your society that says no, we don't take the subway. Or most people you know that are around you say, no, we don't like taking the subway. Or you have a friends group who doesn't take the subway, right? So there's some social pressure there that will actually override things like cost as a motivator. And we'll talk about cost in a moment. There's another one. There's your actual ability or your perceived ability. So, for instance, it may actually cost more to let's say it costs more to take the subway and driving would be cheaper. Well, but let's say you don't have a lot of confidence in your ability to navigate the new city that you find yourself in, right? Or you don't, maybe it's nighttime and you don't really have a lot of confidence that you could drive at night easily, right, and safely. Well, then what are you going to do? You're going to choose maybe the more expensive option in that case. It depends on other things, right? But you're going to choose the more expensive option in that case, taking the subway. So he says that it's funny because a lot of economics, and I have nothing against economists, okay? But especially in the last decade, a lot of economic models have been shown to be just wrong. I mean, rational choice theory, for instance, if you've ever heard of rational choice theory, like we're a rational actor, we make rational decisions and all that stuff. That's been shown to be wrong. I mean, just very wrong. I mean, like there's just so much evidence now that rational choice theory isn't even predictive. It's not very predictive. Meaning it doesn't really even very accurately predict our behavior and our decisions. So these other theories in psychology and cognitive science are much better than these economic theories. And so, yeah, I really agree with him here. So where's the middle of the road here? Where's the middle of the road between, Fluke, let's say this Fluke book, which says, all of society's behaviors is unpredictable, complex systems are unpredictable, versus Sadi Lalo's claim that individual behavior is really predictable. Well, there might not be a conflict between those, right? Individual behavior may be very predictable, right? It may be. I think, honestly, he does leave out some other models, right, and other things that could make human behavior less predictable. But let's just go with it. I think he has a point. Human behavior, for at least certain contexts, is quite predictable. I think we can accept that. But in groups, we tend to be less predictable. In groups, we're less predictable. And that's actually where rational choice theory does shine. If rational choice theory isn't totally useless. I actually think rational choice theory, which is meaning, like self-interest, right? You're guided by your self-interest. You have a certain set of preferences that you follow, and you should always act in alignment with those preferences, right? I think rational choice theory can explain a lot of behavior that we see of certain groups. For instance, companies, how companies behave, right? Most of the time, not always, but for instance, how companies behave is usually more like in an amoral sense, not immoral, not moral, just amoral, right? So we seek to maximize profit. That's the motivation. Whatever will do that for us, we'll follow that. They seem to conform to that. Many times governments seem to conform to that behavior as well. Kind of in an amoral, sometimes immoral, many times immoral, but often just an amoral sense that, okay, what is in our own national interest, and we'll do what's in our own national interest. We're going to try to think about what the other country is going to do in their own national interest, and we will engage in X, Y, Z type of behavior as a response or as a preventive measure, right, or something like that. So in those cases, I think rational choice theory is actually really predictive. It's not I just think it's predictive. There's evidence that it is actually predictive in those situations. So, what do you think? There's a lot here, right? I gave you a lot here, but just to wrap up, like I give you the book titles again, right? So the book titles, Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy, great book. Okay. We also have Fluke by Brian Klaas, BrianKlaas, and then we have Why People Do What They Do and How to Get Them to Change by Sadi Lalo. Again, all evidence-based books. Right? You can see them as personal development books, and they certainly can be used that way. They certainly can be. For instance, you can use a lot of these books to form better habits. Right? You can certainly use them that way. But they're evidence-based. They're not just, hey, I had an experience, right? I worked at this, I did this, and I did this, and I succeeded, and then you should do it too, right? That's most of self-help, right? It's not just that. It's actually evidence-based stuff. So I appreciate you guys. Oh yeah, UV, I will give you the books. So once again, I'm going to give you guys the titles. So because I know some people just joined. So UV, welcome. So Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy, right? Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy. All, again, evidence-based books that are for personal growth, but evidence-based. Fluke by Brian Klaas, Brian, and then Klaas. And then Why People Do What They Do and How to Get Them to Change by Sadi Lalo. And again, this is on replay. So if you missed the titles, again, you can go back to replay. I'll probably put them in the description once this video is live, but as well. But guys, I have been working on something really huge, so stay tuned. Working on something called Critical Thinking Academy. If you're interested in leveling up your critical thinking, then stay tuned this next week because I've got a lot of huge announcements. I'm really excited about it. I think it's a way for all of us to grow as well. So thanks for being with me, guys. And I will see you next week. And stay tuned to my videos. Keep in touch with me. Reach out to me. I always love hearing from everybody. And this whole community is about sharing ideas with each other and interacting with each other, right? Not just hearing from me, right? Cool. I think I have some great ideas, but I think all you have some great ideas too. So I would love to hear from you. So have a great rest of your day, guys, and be well.